During the early Middle Ages, monarchs in Western Europe stood at the head of society, but had limited power. Nobles and the church had as much or more power than monarchs. Both nobles and the church had their own courts, collected their own taxes, and fielded their own armies. They jealously guarded their rights and privileges against any effort by monarchs to increase royal authority. After about 1000, the balance of power started to shift. Monarchs in England and France used various means to centralize power. They expanded their royal estates to provide more economic support, set up systems of royal justice that undermined feudal and church courts, organized government bureaucracies to make administration more efficient, developed new and more efficient systems for collecting taxes, and used their growing wealth to build permanent and professional standing armies. Monarchs also strengthened their ties with wealthy townspeople of the middle class, who supported rulers that could impose the peace and order needed for successful trade. England was formed by the blending of different Germanic cultures. The Anglo-Saxons invaded in the 500s when Roman rule collapsed. Then Danish Vikings came to the island in the 800s and fought with the Anglo-Saxons. Alfred the Great, a Saxon king, united England under one rule for the first time by defeating the Vikings. He reorganized the army, issued his own code of laws, and promoted learning. Over time, the Saxons and Vikings merged into a single civilization that became the basis for modern English culture. In 1066, King Edward the Confessor died, and a dispute arose over his successor. Both Harold Godwinson, a Saxon noble, and William, the Duke of Normandy in northern France, claimed the throne. William invaded England and defeated Harold at the Battle of Hastings. The victory at Hastings was immortalized in a magnificent work of art called the Bayeux Tapestry, a 230-foot-long woven representation of the events surrounding the battle. The tapestry provides historians with much information about the Norman conquest of England. Once William had conquered England, he imposed his control over the land. He granted fiefs to the church and to his Norman lords, or barons, but kept a large amount of land for himself. He carefully monitored who built castles and where, and required every vassal to personally swear first allegiance to him, rather than to any other lord. To learn about his kingdom, William had a complete census taken in 1086. The result was the Domesday Book, which listed all the goods and property in England. This information helped William and later English monarchs build an efficient system of tax collection. William's successors also created the Royal Exchequer, or Treasury, to collect taxes. The English kings who followed William during the early Middle Ages had two main goals. First, to increase their wealth and power, they tried to expand the lands under their direct control, especially in France. Second, they also wanted to increase their control over the government and church in England. Henry II, who ruled from 1154 to 1189, was one of the strongest of these kings. He married the French noblewoman Eleanor of Aquitaine, which gave him control over more land in France. He made a stronger central government by sending royal judges around the kingdom to maintain law and order. The rulings of these royal judges formed a unified body of law called common law. Unlike local feudal laws, common law applied to all of England. In time, people brought their disputes to royal courts rather than to those of nobles or the church. Because royal courts charged fees, the Exchequer benefited from the growth of royal justice. Today, the principles of English common law are the basis for law in many English-speaking countries, including the United States. Henry also began the practice of trial by jury in England. When traveling justices visited an area, local officials collected a group of men sworn to speak the truth. These early juries determined which cases should be brought to trial and were ancestors of today's grand jury. Later, another jury evolved composed of 12 neighbors of an accused person, who answered a royal judge's questions about a case. This was the ancestor of today's trial jury. Jury trials became a popular means of settling disputes, and because only the king's courts were allowed to conduct them, this strengthened royal power. Henry's efforts to extend royal power led to a bitter dispute with the church. Henry claimed the right to try clergy in royal courts. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, fiercely opposed the king. The conflict simmered for years until some of Henry's knights killed the archbishop in 1170. Henry was forced to make peace with the church. Meanwhile, Becket was honored as a martyr and declared a saint. Pilgrims flocked to his tomb at Canterbury, where miracles were said to occur. King John proved less able than Henry. He ruled harshly and violated the rights of the nobles. A poor leader, he lost most of his lands in France, and then had to burden his people with heavy taxes to pay for costly wars to regain this territory. Even the church turned against John. Pope Innocent III excommunicated John and placed England under an interdict when John disagreed with the Pope over the appointment of a new Archbishop of Canterbury. Fed up with the inept rule of John and his abuses of power, the nobles finally rebelled. In 1215 they forced him to sign the Magna Carta, a document that put legal limits on the power of the king. First, it asserted that the nobles had certain political rights that could not be violated. Second, it made clear that the monarch was not above the law and must obey it. Though the nobles were primarily concerned only with safeguarding their own privileges, in later years English people argued that the Magna Carta applied to every citizen. The Magna Carta protected freemen from arbitrary arrest, imprisonment, and other actions, and formed the basis of the right known as due process of law. The Magna Carta also created the basis for the right of habeas corpus, the principle that no person can be held in prison without first being charged with a specific crime. The king also could not raise new taxes without consulting his great council of lords and clergy. The Magna Carta guaranteed what are now considered basic legal rights in England, the United States, and other democracies. Because of this, the Magna Carta is one of the most important documents in history. In keeping with the Magna Carta, English rulers often called the Great Council of Lords and Clergy for advice. During the 1200s, this council evolved into Parliament, which later became England's legislature. In 1295, King Edward I summoned Parliament to approve money for his wars in France. To broaden his support, he had representatives of the common people join with the lords and clergy. The commons included low-ranking knights, merchants, and important townspeople. Much later, this assembly became known as the Model Parliament because it set up the framework for England's legislature. Over the centuries, as kings called Parliament more frequently to get money, it gained the crucial power of the purse, the right to approve any new taxes. With that power, Parliament could insist that the monarch meet its demands before voting for taxes. Like the Magna Carta, Parliament could limit the power of the monarch. Medieval France was divided into many separate territories, each ruled by a lord who jealously guarded his privileges and power. A new dynasty of kings called the Capetians ruled from 987 to 1328. Beginning with the founder of the dynasty, Hugh Capet, the early Capetian kings took several important steps to increase their power and unify the country. They added to their lands by playing rival nobles against each other, and won the support of the church. Perhaps most important, they built an effective bureaucracy that collected taxes and imposed royal law over the king's lands. By establishing order, they increased their prestige and gained the backing of the new middle class. The power of the king gradually spread outward from Paris, which became an important center of trade and scholarship. Eventually, this growth of royal power would unite France. One of the most successful Capetian kings of France was Philip II, also known as Philip Augustus, who ruled from 1180 to 1223. He greatly increased the territory under his control, in part by seizing French lands that belonged to the English. He also made a stronger central government by using royal officials called bailiffs to travel around and collect taxes and maintain law and order. These officials were drawn from the middle class and owed their positions and loyalty to the king. Philip's successors continued to build royal power in France. His grandson Louis IX was a deeply religious man. Louis created royal courts where people could go for help if they were being treated unfairly by their local lord. To ensure justice, he even heard cases himself. These royal courts of France strengthened the monarchy while weakening the feudal lords. His enormous personal prestige helped create a strong national feeling among his subjects. By the time of his death in 1270, France was beginning to emerge as an efficient, centralized monarchy. To win wider support in a quarrel with the Pope, King Philip IV set up the Estates General in 1302. This body had representatives from all three estates or social classes of French society. Church clergy were the first estate, great lords the second estate, and commoners were the third estate. Like the English Parliament in its early years, the Estates General helped to increase royal power against the nobility. Unlike Parliament, however, it never became an independent force that limited royal authority.